Picture a man sitting alone in a small room on the 33rd floor of the New Yorker hotel. He appears frail, obsessive, and to the casual observer, he seems to have completely lost his grip on reality. He spends his days nursing injured pigeons and his nights scribbling frantically in notebooks that the scientific community has long since dismissed. To the hotel staff and the public, Nikola Tesla is a tragic figure, an eccentric genius chewed up and spat out by the political machinery of his time. But a closer examination of those notebooks reveals a different narrative. While the world sees a man who has hit rock bottom, a terrifying level of clarity is emerging within that isolation. He is not broken, he is designing the future. This is not merely a cautionary tale of failure, but a recurring historical pattern. Alan Turing endured this precise isolation. Isaac Newton retreated similarly during the plague years. Even Lao Tzu, thousands of years ago, felt compelled to leave the empire and vanish into the wilderness to write the Tao Te Ching. This strange consistency forces a disturbing question. Is this suffering actually necessary? It appears this is not a series of unfortunate events, but a precise recurring structure, a 5-stage arc that almost every person who introduces a new reality to the world is forced to walk. It begins invariably with seeing something others refuse to acknowledge, followed by forced exile, which acts not as a punishment, but as a catalyst for profound insight. This phenomenon, the founder's arc, illuminates the trajectory of contemporary figures who feel betrayed by the current intellectual and institutional order. Classical liberals and moderate conservatives today diagnose a decay in Western civilization, specifically resisting what they perceive as a dissolution of common sense tied to a therapeutic state. There is a direct line from the historical necessity of Tesla's painful isolation to this current moment. The noble sense of betrayal drives these institutional night watchmen into a phase of great work where they attempt to develop radical new structural solutions to counter the enemy and narcissistic culture fostered by elite institutions. To understand this dynamic, we must trace the arc from the extreme fiction of a mind-controlled captain in a sci-fi empire to the reality of political figures actively regrouping to build a new institutional backbone. In every case, the process begins with viewing the existing structure as compromised, being forced out, and using that isolation as a furnace to forge a new coherent framework for societal order. To understand the baseline of true mental subjugation, we look to the world of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series and the domain of the mule. The mule governs a vast union of worlds not through secret police or armies, but through a complete psychological restructuring of the individual. The case study for this is Han Pritchard, a man representing the perfect institutional conversion. Pritchard was a dedicated, high-ranking captain in the Democratic opposition, violently fighting against the mule until he was prominently converted. This was not a debate he lost, nor was he persuaded by superior arguments. The mule's mutant mental attributes simply adjusted Pritchard's emotional conditions. The terror lies in the symptoms of this control. Now a loyal lieutenant general, Pritchard feels warmly satisfied. He is no longer curious about his own changed state. He has no desire to investigate how he transformed from an assassin into a loyalist. He interprets the lack of physical chains not as freedom, but as evidence of the master's sure and confident power. This is the deepest part of the psychological destruction, the severance of the link between intellect and emotion. Pritchard intellectually remembers his attempts to kill the mule. The objective facts remain, but he cannot recall the anger or moral conviction that drove him. The why is gone, leaving only the what. Consequently, the individual becomes highly functional, but critically lacks initiative. As the mule notes, Pritchard is now incapable of prompt or daring action. The emotional spark required for leadership is extinguished, leaving a compromised institutional player who is compliant, prosperous, and utterly neutered. The contemporary parallel to this fiction is not a single mutant, but the sensation that institutions themselves have been converted by an ideology. When people feel that media, universities, and political parties have been adjusted away from their core principles, they experience a similar sense of noble betrayal. This drives the formation of groups like the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, founded by insiders like Baroness Stroud, hedge fund manager Paul Marshall, and Jordan Peterson. These are not fringe figures. They are responding structurally to a civilizational crisis. Their diagnosis focuses on the erosion of social capital and the hollowing out of foundational institutions like the Christian Church. They argue that Western society is plagued by self-doubt and confusion because these institutions are no longer strong enough to maintain cohesive social norms or pass on a shared culture. This narrative void creates a profound geostrategic vulnerability. In response, they are stepping outside existing structures to build a new one, a positive agenda defined by traditional Western values rather than purely oppositional politics. The financial backing underscores the seriousness of this project, with Paul Marshall contributing £1 million in 2023 and pharma CEO Derek Cooper adding $500,000 in 2025. This capital investment is a physical manifestation of their sense of betrayal. They are building a lifeboat because they believe the ship is structurally unsound. Once in intellectual exile, the first stage of the great work is a deep structural diagnosis of the threat. For these rationalist exiles, the diagnosis points to the woke ascendancy, or cultural socialism. This movement is defined sociologically as the sacralization of historically marginalized race, gender, and sexual minorities. By viewing these identities as sources of moral purity, political debate transforms into a religious conflict between the sacred and the profane. The analysis classifies this not as economic Marxism, but cultural socialism, focused on equal outcomes and emotional harm protection. This shift from material equality to psychological safety makes the ideology resistant to traditional liberal critiques, as arguing against empathy often appears cruel. However, the exiles argue that prioritizing emotional safety above free speech is fundamentally illiberal and deculturing, undermining shared national narratives. This results in an asymmetric political bias, where adherents dominate culture-forming institutions, creating a self-reinforcing echo chamber. The central challenge is that this ideology is difficult to counter with rational methods, because its strength is its emotional core. It operates as a mythos rather than a logos, rooted in a powerful egalitarian care reflex that drives bottom-up repression. It is not just the institution punishing dissent, but peers enforcing norms. Empirical research clarifies who supports these illiberal enforcement mechanisms. Support for reporting instructors or shouting down speakers is overwhelmingly highest among those identifying as very liberal. Statistically, women are twice as likely as men to support these reporting behaviors, and non-heterosexual individuals are almost twice as likely as heterosexual individuals to support these reporting behaviors. Crucially, race itself does not appear to be a major differentiating factor. Ideological adherence is a far better predictor of who will enforce these norms than demographic identity. Recognizing the threat as emotional and illiberal, the rationalist counter-movement pivots to pure, verifiable reason, political meritocracy, or episocracy. The proposal is to allocate political power based on competence, specifically exalted intellectual ability and virtue. This involves weighting votes based on demonstrable knowledge, such as basic facts about current events and social scientific understanding of cause and effect. However, a profound structural flaw emerges. While exams can select for intelligence, they are ineffective at selecting for virtue.
moral knowledge does not equate to moral motivation. A demagogue or a perfectly rational psychopath can possess profound moral knowledge and simply lie on a test. Empirical evidence supports this. Research shows that ethics professors who possess superior moral knowledge behave no differently in terms of actual moral conduct than non-ethicists. Since virtue is untestable, the system selects for cleverness rather than goodness.
Even proposals for smaller, elite electorates, like a meritocratic Senate, fail because small groups foster corruption and insider dealing faster than large dispersed ones. Proximity breeds politics, undermining the rationalist goal. Facing the failure of political structures due to human nature, the rationalist must retreat further into the ultimate crucible of isolation. We turn to the fictional Dr. Darrell, whose isolation is a choice born of absolute necessity. Understanding that working within the established order was a compromise, Darrell leaves his colleagues to escape the observation that might jeopardize his work. He fears that being known compromises the secrecy required for his breakthrough. In the absolute quiet of a suburban house, a fortress of intellectual seclusion, he refines his goal. He realizes his previous ability to detect a tamper plateau, the residual emotional scar left on a manipulated mind, was merely diagnostic. He needed a weapon. This leads to the creation of the mental static device. Unlike normal brainwaves, which have a readable, consistent pattern, this device generates a dense, chaotic electromagnetic field that shifts explicitly in a kaleidoscopic manner. It acts as a blinding noise source, a sensory overload that masks minds within its radius. Forged in total isolation, it is a structural, non-psychological solution to psychological oppression. However, the narrative takes a tragic turn. Dr. Darrell believes he has perfected the great work, but his entire journey, his betrayal, exile, and breakthrough, was merely a component in a grander design by the Second Foundation. His colleague, Peleus Anther, was a tool of the Second Foundation, engineered to mature Darrell's paranoia and drive him deeper into the necessary isolation. Even the Calganian War, which the First Foundation believed they won, was initiated by the Second Foundation as a massive psychological therapy session to restore the Foundation's self-esteem. Most chillingly, the Second Foundation allowed the mental static device to be built because they understood that without an active enemy, the science of encephalographic analysis would become sterile and die. They anticipated the device would become obsolete, a museum piece within a century. The deepest cost of this rational design falls on Dr. Darrell's daughter, Arcadia. She is the linchpin of the plan, the only person Darrell trusts. To ensure the First Foundation dropped its guard, Arcadia had to be absolutely certain she had located the Second Foundation. But this certainty was not her own. It was imposed upon her. The Second Foundation controlled her mind during infancy, when she was a blank slate, to avoid leaving a detectable tamper plateau. She never knew autonomy. Her intuition and deductions were orchestrated to ensure the final switch was thrown at the precise moment. The maintenance of the rational Selden plan required the total manipulation of an individual's liberty from birth. This brings us to the ultimate philosophical tension defining civilization, articulated by Leo Strauss, the conflict between the claims of pure reason and the claims of revelation. The complete victory of one over the other is devastating. If pure reason wins, as in the Selden plan, it banishes mystery and imposes a predictable statistical box on human existence, eliminating the elusive core of liberty. Strauss argued that human beings need faith or mystery to live well, and that reason cannot definitively refute revelation.
The anti-religious excess, the attempt to completely rationalize human existence, culminates in the control of the second foundation. The rational great work, when fully realized, eliminates the very liberty it sought to preserve. The lesson for the political exile is that structural analysis born from isolation, while necessary, cannot be the final answer if its goal is total victory over the chaos of human nature. Such victory is impossibly costly. Societal vitality requires an irreducible, messy tension. The great work must always account for the persistent necessity of human mystery.